Welcome to Speaking of Entrepreneurship, a podcast powered by the Center for Entrepreneurs at Cuyahoga Community College's Corporate College. Here, we dive into real conversations with industry experts, innovative founders, and business leaders who share their insights, challenges, and strategies for success. Whether you're launching a startup, scaling your business, or just exploring the entrepreneurial mindset, this is your space to learn, adapt, and thrive.
Entrepreneurship through acquisition has become an increasingly popular path for aspiring business owners. Rising trends have been attributed to the increase of MBA graduates seeking a faster route to business ownership, coupled with an aging population of small business owners presenting a large pool of potential acquisition targets. My name is Heather Holmes Dillard, and joining me today is Tony Manna, founder and chairman of M7 Holdings and Signet, a global investment firm, a visionary entrepreneur, dedicated family man, and passionate advocate for community and business growth. Tony has been instrumental in building collaborative partnerships, leading Signets to own over 25 companies, including 10 startups across manufacturing, distribution, health, and technology, as well as developing over $5 billion in real estate development projects. Tony is credited for playing a key role in bringing the Akron Ducks and Canal Park Stadium to the city of Akron. Also here with me today is Larry Fulton, a seasoned entrepreneur and investor with an impressive track record of driving business growth and innovation in lower middle market companies. The founder and managing principal of Fulton Equity, Larry has led investments in diverse industries, including industrial, business services, consumer products, and value-add distribution. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
We did it. We did it. So tell me, both of you have very, very interesting stories on how you kind of started in this journey of entrepreneurship through acquisitions and investment. Tony, I read a very cool story about a quote that really inspired you by John McConnell. Tell me about this quote and how that inspired your journey.
Well, I was at Ohio State undergrad, and Mr. McConnell was one of the key founders of Worthington Industries. And it came about during the big recession in the early 80s. And a bunch of steel companies were closing, but Worthington Industries was thriving. So they invited him to visit the business school. And one of the things, as he got introduced, the professor went on and on and on about how wonderful Mr. McConnell is. Mm-hmm. And frankly, it was kind of nauseating, but that's beside the point. But Mr. McConnell then got up and said, I really should sit down after that introduction. He probably is not going to get any better for me. But he said, and then he stopped and he looked at all of us, but kids, everything the professor said that I did, I did. Mm-hmm. And he said, and there's lots of things I do for the community that I never tell people about. Mm-hmm. So he said, I'm going to tell you the 20 things you need to do to accomplish what you want to accomplish. It was hyperbole a little bit, but at the end of the day, what he said was, if you want to do the most for your community, start a business. Because he said, when you start a business, those employees then begin to give money to their churches, to their civic organizations, and so on and so on. He goes, that is the greatest thing you can do for a community. And I can remember walking out of there saying to my buddies, watch.
That gives me goosebumps,
I
right?
said, that is exactly what I'm going to do.
And so how'd you start? So after school, what was the first thing you did?
Well, I went to law school, and and I'm also a big believer that people make the difference. And what ended up happening was when I got engaged to my wife, I went to look at, it all got started with a Ukrainian immigrant. A woman had a duplex for sale. And this all got started because I went to her, it was said for sale by owner. And I said to her, her name was Stella Skavarka. And she was elderly. And I said, Mrs. Skavarka, to be honest with you, I have no money. I said, I need you to loan me the down payment if we're going to do this, I'll match your price. And she said, young man, I'll do it. She financed the deal for me.
That's awesome.
And she's the one that got me started doing the road. And after that, I started buying little units all through seller financing. And that's how I ended up getting started.
We're going to get into these financing options because that is a very interesting story. Larry, you were quoted saying that your life's passion in acquiring undervalued companies, optimizing operations, and creating predictable and significant investment returns while also creating meaningful jobs. So I see like this kinship here about, impacting community, creating jobs. Talk us through your journey from structured finance at KeyBank onto Alcoa and then into underwriting and into entrepreneurship.
Actually, it starts a little before that.
Okay.
So really a long time ago when I was in high school, I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. Okay. So by the time I got to college, and I went to Florida A&M University, the School of Business and Industry there, and I read a couple of books. By the time I got to college, I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I just didn't really know exactly how or what type of entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. But I read a couple of books. One in particular was about a guy named Reginald Lewis. Mm-hmm. And I think
I know him.
Yeah, so Reginald Lewis did a $1 billion buyout of Beatrice Food Company back in the 80s, and he looked like me. And so prior to me reading that book around my freshman year, I really didn't have any role models that did deals like I wanted to do deals, right? And so reading a couple of books, then it kind of led me on this path to becoming an entrepreneur. So I did a couple of internships, graduated. I actually went to Cleveland with the lower paying job that I could have gotten out of college simply because I could live with my grandparents in the city of Cleveland to save money.
I hear that.
So now I grew up in South Carolina, country, very small populated area. I really didn't know that much about Cleveland. However, I was born in Cleveland. Okay. But I moved to South Carolina when I was really little. So college, coming to Cleveland, it was more of a culture shock for me. I didn't really know that many people here. Lived with my grandparents, was able to start saving my money. And so I worked for KeyBank at the time. I went through their retail management training program and then their commercial management training program and winded up in this group called Structured Finance. Now, I was still living with my grandparents in their two-family home in Cleveland. But this allowed me to underwrite, analyze, structure middle market transactions and gave me, that passion for doing transactions. I was structuring these deals. I was writing up all these transactions and seeing how other people were doing it.
And you're like, hey, I can do that.
I can eventually get there one day. I need some capital really to get started. And so I convinced my girlfriend, moved to Cleveland. We got married. And guess what? She lived with my grandparents in our two-family house as well. And so she went through law school. And we saved for about 3 years. Now, really quickly, when my parents wanted to move my grandparents out of that neighborhood, because it was in the city of Cleveland, and safety just was a factor for us at that point in time, I told my parents, I said, look, I'm not ready. I need a couple more years to continue saving. I'm on a great track. I'm building my credit, building my equity, building my net worth. But I need a couple more years. And so my parents allowed me and my wife and my grandparents to live with them when they moved to Pepper Pike. Uh-huh. And so it was 3 generations, one household. There was a lot of Fultons in that house. But for a couple of more years, my wife graduated law school. She was working as a lawyer. I've moved on from KeyBank to the Small Business Administration. I got my MBA at that point. Okay. And we had no debt. We weren't doing the fancy vacations and the fancy cars and the fancy clothes or whatever. We just socked away our money for the sole purpose of me being an entrepreneur later down the road. So that's really how I got started.
So then in 2003, your first acquisition was an Amish pallet manufacturer.
That's correct. So I saved funds, did a few other corporate moves. And actually, when I did my first acquisition in 2003, I was still in corporate America.
Okay.
At that point, I was a general manager for Alcoa, and I was running a fairly large division for them. But the first deal, I built strong relationships with several brokers around the region. And I had a broker that introduced me to a small pallet manufacturing company that was in Middlefield. And I did that acquisition with some equity, obviously, that I had saved, some debt that I obtained from the SBA and the bank. And that started my entrepreneurial journey.
So tell me, both of you, what drew you to this path of entrepreneurship?
You want to go?
Well, I say it again. Really, it was. I knew I wanted to be in business. I didn't know exactly what type of entrepreneurship, but when I became an underwriter essentially and a senior analyst at KeyBank, I started seeing just tons and hundreds of deals. It became more supported when I worked for the Small Business Administration, basically doing hundreds of approvals of transactions of middle markets, lower middle market, startup transactions, working with private equity, working with venture-backed organizations, working with small businesses, and just constantly seeing that this is very possible. I can make a significant income. I can build wealth. I can make a significant impact in my community by doing entrepreneurship. And so that's really what started my entrepreneurial journey.
So let's go to finance. So you talked about SBA as a vehicle. I think it's a 7A program. You talked about seller finance. I've heard about this thing, search funds. What are the kind of opportunities out there for financing deals like this that are common, that are uncommon, that you would recommend someone looking to get into ETA?
Well, I would sit there and say, obviously, common or bank finance type loans, obviously. But when you're getting started, and I would sit there and say, you need a little creativity. So I'll give another example of what I did. So it's kind of ironic as I was driving here that this is in Warrensville Heights. Because the first manufacturing deal I ever purchased was here in Warrensville Heights.
Okay.
And this was 30 years ago, roughly. And I had no money. And to make a long story short, this particular small manufacturing company was headed into trouble. So I went to the vendors and I said, I need you to finance me to buy the business. And they're like, why should we do this? I said, this is not rocket science. If it goes out of business, you lose a customer. And it was a tier 3 automotive manufacturer. We're not talking about some lightweight thing here. So they agreed to do it. And we bought the business with mainly vendor financing. We did get a small line of credit from a lender, but they went out and they did it. And that's how we bought the company.
That's what they call history. That's amazing.
I mean, there's so many different creative ways to structure and finance a deal. I mean, especially nowadays where the capital stack, I guess participants, if I can call them that, it's almost endless. You have vendor financing structures. You have equity-only deals. You have highly leveraged transactions on a small scale. You could use the SBA in terms of financing up to 90% of a particular transaction. You have your traditional commercial bank, which would normally see leverage somewhere around 75% of a transaction, meaning about 25% equity. And you have the traditional search model where you might have a fund, you might have a debt and equity sponsor that is looking at an entrepreneur and would fund a particular deal for that individual. There's a variety of different creative structures out there.
So when we started, talked about there's a number of small businesses, mid-sized businesses that are family owned or individually owned who may be looking to retire and don't may not have son, daughter, family to take the business over and looking for ways to get out. as someone who may be interested to, purchase that business? Is there an industry that, folks should look at? Is it all types of things? Is it like passion? I think about here in Cleveland, over in Orange Village, the Village Square Pizza, right? That was in business forever and a part of, families' Friday nights, for years. And then, some other restaurateurs just it was a purchase of heart, right? To keep it up and going. And in months they, have now closed. So when you think about, buying a business, what are the type of businesses that you would recommend looking into?
Well, first, I think some statistics are in order. In Northeast Ohio, actually Northern Ohio, Western Pennsylvania, Southern Michigan, and, Eastern Indiana, a record number of small businesses are going to be put up for sale in the next 10 to 20 years. Because to your point, a lot of the owners are, getting to the my age, and they're thinking about selling. A large percentage of them, their kids have no interest in the business. Most of those businesses are what I'm going to say, for lack of a better term, are probably non-sexy type businesses, but they're the opportunities that some young entrepreneurs could get hold of.
And don't necessarily need to be an expert in those?
Well, I've always said this. We buy many different types of businesses. When we start out, we know nothing about the business. By the time we close, we know an awful lot about the business. So I don't think you really do need to know when you get started. By the time you make the deal, you better know the business inside and out. So I think it just comes down to your passion, making moves like Larry has and so forth, where you have that passion. And it's not just the passion, it's also the work ethic to stay at it. And as I like to call it, grit, because you're going to get punched in the face a lot. And when you're getting started, and you better be tough and make your way through
That's that entrepreneur spirit, right? Yeah.
So can I add a little bit onto that? So this silver tsunami is what people are
I got in so much trouble saying that term the other day, let me tell you. But go ahead. Yes, the silver tsunami.
So a lot of people are referring to the silver tsunami event, where there's 33 million businesses that are being operated today. Some puts this number at, let's say, 16 million businesses may be coming up for sale. And if you do the math right now on a annualized basis, there's something like 15 to 20 million businesses that transact every year. Well, when you incorporate the silver tsunami impact, unfortunately, this generation is going to be retiring, and there's a lot of businesses that are going to have to change hands, something like $10 trillion worth of businesses over the next 5 to 10 years, really. So it's going to happen really fast. When you factor this impact, we're going to see a movement from a normal 15 to 20,000 businesses that transact annually to something close to 100,000. And so where all these entrepreneurs are going to come from, and I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of universities and institutions are being very aggressive around ETA education.
I've seen a lot of courses.
There's a lot that's popping up right now, because this is no secret that this wave, it could be a wave, it could be a tsunami. Who knows really what's going to happen? But we do know that, the baby boomer generation was one of the best generations in terms of entrepreneurship. They own the businesses. They have the value, and those businesses, unfortunately, they do have to transact. And so when they transact, I tell entrepreneurs this all the time. Before you go out and buy a business, my suggestion is you do have the grit. You need the passion. You need to understand what you're getting into and really do a self-assessment to understand that, how many hours do I want to work a week? Because a business is going to test you if you're going to be an entrepreneur. Really, it will. I mean, I remember the first 2 deals that I've done, I was probably working an unbelievable amount of hours. It's almost insane for me to even think about it. But it was way more than your normal
80-hour work week.
Right. And so just really thinking through that, thinking through the types of business that you're familiar with or accustomed to that you want to go after. I actually have a a list of aspects from an industry perspective that I try to focus on. Wanting to make sure that the industry is very profitable, that there's low cyclicality, that there's relatively low capital expenditure requirements for business, that there's limited technology kind of inflection on a company. Now, I have invested in a company that disrupts because of technology, but its particular technology doesn't necessarily change that frequently. And there's a variety of different aspects with an industry as well as a particular subsect of that industry that I think entrepreneurs should focus on, more or less like the profitability of an industry. How difficult is it for you to be a competitive or the competitive positioning within a particular market? So there's so many different things for you to factor in. And then on top of that, you want to look at global kind of geopolitical issues that might impact certain industries over another, right?
Manufacturing, transportation.
Yes, right. There's a ton of different things, but I would say definitely during diligence and before. Diligence, particularly very important because that's the one chance that you get to analyze a business before you make millions of dollars worth of an investment, right? But before you even go to diligence, understanding, your trigger points as a person, as an individual, understand the trigger points and the inflection points for the team that you're working with, understand the particular market, and then understand the sub-market, understand the particular type of business. Really understanding that and drilling that in. That's why a lot of searchers create what's called a one-pager, which is essentially an acquisition thesis. And that one-pager forces you to really understand all of those trigger points. Because if you make a mistake when you buy a business, it's not like buying a house. I mean, buying a house is a very significant acquisition for most people, right? A business could be 10, 20 times more than that. It could be obviously in the millions of dollars. So to make a mistake when you do an acquisition, it could be extremely costly.
Well, because there's other people's jobs and livelihood and all the things.
That's right.
So thank you for that, advice on how to start, like things you should think about before you start. What are some common pitfalls, Tony, that folks who are starting out should really be mindful of? I've heard, you talk about the team you have around you, like who's around you. Got to have a lawyer,
Yeah, that's true. One thing that, I can't speak for everyone, but one thing that I always do with all our business, and by the way, this applies to every single deal we do when it comes to a company, is that all the key management team have to buy in.
Of the company you're buying.
But right. So if they're there, I said, if they're, and some of them are not performing well, but sometimes they're not performing well, not because of the management team. Sometimes the owner doesn't have enough capital to put in to allow them to do what they need to do. So you have to get in and do that analysis. But at the end of the day, I always tell them, I said, you will buy in. If you don't have the money, we will loan you the money. And I still remember this one day, the guy tells me, he says, Tony, I really appreciate that, but I'm not going to buy in. I will spend your money more conservatively than you will spend yours. And I said, that's probably true, but I want to make sure the day we close, I'm going to terminate you. And he stops. And I said, because if you don't believe in this business enough to take my loan to buy in, then I don't want you. So I said, I'll give you to tomorrow to think about it. Now, he did borrow the money, and by the way, he's doing
that back.
he's doing a great job.
Yeah.
But my point to all this is that you can do a lot of analysis, and at the end of the day, you got to pull the trigger.
You don't want to have analysis paralysis.
And as you pull the trigger, to me, it comes down to people, and you want that team to not only want to work together, but they've got incentive that I always joke. You don't want somebody going home who's your manager at 5 o'clock watching soap operas. You want them thinking about the business. Yeah. So that's what we look for.
So tell me, again, for folks who are looking to start, is this the kind of path to entrepreneurship that you would recommend? Has it been, fruitful? For you, is it worth the 80-hour work weeks?
I'll answer it this way. If you have a graduate from a top MBA program, who leaves, let's say Harvard for an example, and they're making $200,000 a year. If you look at that compensation, and let's say that compensation has a CAGR or an annualized growth of like 10% a year, right? You look at that at the end of 10 years, they're making millions of dollars, right? Maybe a couple of $1 million, right? Which is not bad. That is really good. Now, if you compare the same MBA grad that was fortunate enough to buy, let's say, a $5 million or a $3 million manufacturing company, and let's say their starting income is still $200,000. Somewhere around year 3, year 4, you're going to start seeing a income difference. And that income difference pretty much is created because of the growth of the business. By year 2, year 3, year 4, that entrepreneur starts to grow the business. And you can grow the business organically. You can either grow the business through acquisition, right? But the moral of the story, or the point of the story, is there's going to be some development somewhere down, in year 2, year 3, or year 4, where there's going to be an income difference. And that will continue, that will persist until let's say year 7, year 10. And at that point, there's an event, there's a triggering event that creates a significant difference in the income making ability. And that's the exit, that's the sell of that asset that you cannot do if you have a $300,000-$400,000 a year job in corporate America. Now, I love corporate America. I think there's certainly a place for that. But the fact is, when you model out the differences, you do have the opportunity to grow an asset and then eventually sell that asset. And that could become a significant windfall, advantage, a wealth building opportunity for your family that you would not otherwise have.
And go ahead.
Oh, you're going to ask him a follow-up.
I was going to say, when you both started with your first business, at what point in this journey did you say, okay, ready to do this again? So when do we grow? When do we grow the portfolio?
Well, I also want to sit there and kind of piggyback a little bit on what Larry said with regards to this. Because there's also the situation, too, where you could model this out, and, of course, in year 5...
It may not.
It may not
go the other way, yeah.
But and the reason I'm bringing this up is that another thing that I also, again, a guy like Larry has passion, and he's got work ethic, smarts, and so forth. But what helps create that passion? And one of the things about taking the risk, because at the end of the day, I've often said, and other people have said this too, it's not just me, that I'd rather own my own business, make $75,000 a year than make $200,000 a year working for somebody else. That's just the nature of my personality. All that being said, one of the big things and I'm bringing this up because I think this applies to a lot of people. I always remember in this business management class we had where the professor was completely worthless except for one day. And this is, why I say person can make a difference in one day. And what he said, what he did was he says, kids, everybody put their books on the floor. We're going to study a survey. And the survey was, back this is 1980, and it was given to men only. Today they would include women, but I understand that. But it was men only who were 65 and older in North America, Mexico, United States, and Canada. Thousands of them. Took 2 hours to complete. They did not tell anybody what the survey was driving towards. But what it was basically asking this question. If you had to live your life all over again, what would you do differently? And they statistically published the top 100 answers. The bottom 98, 3 through 100, were statistically irrelevant. There were only 2 answers that mattered. Number 2 was the one everybody talks about. They wish they had spent more time with their family. Number 1 was the one that was shocking people. And that was, I wish I had taken more risk in my life. And what they showed was even when people failed, they were glad they took the risk. Because at the end, you can't take it with you. So, they were talking about that risk. And that, I think, is how does a guy like he can sit there and do this analysis? There's guys, he could do that for a living. What did he do? He went out and did it. It's that risk taking. At the end of the day, you have to be willing to do it.
So what's the one thing that you would do different?
That I would do different? I would say, I already know what my entire family would be saying right now. They would be saying, I wish I showed a little more patience at times.
Okay. And what about you, Larry? What would you do differently?
I would definitely ditto that. But I would also say I take an assessment every year.
Okay.
So around the first quarter. I don't do it January 1, but the first quarter of the year, fourth quarter of the first quarter, whenever I get around to it, I'll do an assessment, and I'll say to myself, and I write down 4 quadrants essentially, and it's one quadrant is family, one is health, one is entrepreneurship, and one is the vortex, things that I should not be focusing on, right? Things that suck up my time. And so I'll take a look at each one of those quadrants, and I'll prioritize just 3 things that I know that I need to get done in the next 6 to 9 months. I don't say 12 months because then that takes me yet another year. And that's what I focus on. And so most of the times in the business area, it's doing 1 or doing 2 transactions. And a transaction for me is not necessarily always buying a business. It could be selling a business. It could be recapitalizing a business. It could be, going after and helping someone else do an acquisition as well from an equity standpoint. So that's really what I try to do in terms of self-improvement.
Is do an assessment. Would you say you maybe wish you would have started earlier?
Well, yes, for sure. I wish I would have started earlier, hands down. I just didn't have the capital in which to do so. And
you look pretty young. How old were you when you started?
Well, I was 33 in 2003.
That's pretty impressive. Yes.
Yeah. So.
Well, I want to thank you, gentlemen, for sharing insights into entrepreneurship through acquisition. Thank you much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for tuning in to today's podcast, brought to you by the Center for Entrepreneurs at Corporate College. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and share with fellow entrepreneurs. Tune back in to stay connected with us for more insights and resources to help you build, innovate, and thrive.